February 26, 2025 meeting of the Union Township Zoning Commission is now called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll do, Mr. McCormick, could you please call roll?
Yes. Mr. Shannon?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Outridge?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Everybody's here.
Has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes? If so, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 22nd, 2025 meeting?
I'll make that motion.
All right.
Second.
Motion, sir. Mr. McCormick, please call roll.
Mr. Shannon?
Yeah.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Outridge?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, we're not gonna have any speakers tonight, so I'm not gonna go through ask you to go through the explanation of our purpose here. Old business, none. New business, we've got three things we're gonna talk about tonight. Apparently a discussion on proposed text amendments that Mr. McCormick will go over in a minute. We're also gonna talk about the multifamily development in our community that we discussed a couple meetings back, and then Mr. McCormick gathered a lot of data. I've got several copies of that if anyone wasn't able to print it out. Just talk about that a little bit, and then our case motion format and training of new board members. So we'll start with the first item, which is the case 1-25T, discussion of proposed text amendments for the zoning resolution. Mr. McCormick.
Thank you. Really, we just put a spot in here for whatever we're going to bring out of the discussion to be case 125Z. We didn't prepare anything specific because we didn't want to waste time on something that may not be worthwhile. I know I've talked to our administrator, and there are a couple that if everybody's kind of on board, we would like to get on deck to be working on. I think one of the two is particularly, I think, easy for us to do, and it won't involve a lot of wordsmithing. A couple of these other ones that I may bring up might take a little longer. They might be, more of a couple months out to do it. So what I'll do is I'll highlight the couple for sure that we were looking at. So the first one, and probably the easiest one, is right now we don't have a time limit on the overlay plans that are approved like we do the plan developments, or even like a zoning permit. So what happens is some of these overlays sit here for years. We had one, for example, on, we went to the trustees for Panda Express, and the reason why they stopped construction is because they found out about the work they were going to do at Glen Estee and Klepper, which is potentially a viable thing, but in the meantime, that's been 2 years, and they're still waiting because they want the work around that area to be substantially finished before they do anything other than demo the old structure, which they've done, and secured the site. So it's not the only instance that that's happened. Staff was wanting to more or less put some language in there that gives people a time period, just like we do on the PDs. It could be 5 years to match the PDs, or it could be like a zoning permit and you give them a year to start and 2 years to substantially complete, and a provision in there that says if you need more time, you can ask for more in between. I think either one of those could be logical. I don't know if you guys have suggestions or thoughts on it.
How common is this happening? Like, is it like once in a blue moon we've got some sitting around, or is this a regularly occurring issue?
I would say 1 or 2 a year where they're sitting for a while.
Yeah, but then they become cumulative, right? Because
Yeah. And I don't know how many are cumulatively happening. I am seeing from time to time older cases come in, but I myself can remember a few like off the top of my head.
Sure.
There's there's definitely, I would say probably on average 2 a year,
What's our time on PD now? Is it 2 years?
5.
Oh, it's 5 years.
That would be the most generous I think we could be.
Yeah,
I
for
would
sure.
agree, that's pretty generous.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot can happen in 5 years, a lot
Right.
of changes, so.
I can see it being even just 3, 2 to 3.
If you did the 1 year and then it can go, got to start within 1 year or report back why you're not starting. At
And then
least
get an extension, possibly
Yeah,
a 1-year
just-
extension.
keep the township planning division in the loop as to what's happening. And it's not, not, all the rumor mill isn't going on.
That's basically how the permits are handled. You know, you have a year to start, you have 2 years to basically be substantially completed. There's a provision in there that you can ask for more time if you need it, and you can justify it. So theoretically, you can end up with like, maybe even a 3rd year,
Right.
which at my last job, that's how it was done there. They allowed for you to do that up to 3 years, and it was more tied to the Indiana code. But I think you could go either route. I think that 5 years might be a little too long.
I
If
think
we
so.
draft it up like we do the zoning
Yeah.
permit, and you allow for some flexibility in there, and as a staff, when we meet with people, we're saying apply, but wait until you really think you're gonna move forward. Hopefully you don't have that happen as many times.
Right.
I mean, obviously if there's like a collapse in the market or something like we had 2008, it could, impact the project quite a bit. And that's more of a 5-year hit sometimes, but,
But if we do the 1 year, 2 year, it forces them to keep in communication. As
Right.
opposed to just disappearing and then year 5, they come back and.
Yeah, do-it-yourselfers.
so I can draft it up that way, and then ultimately it's, if the trustees want to give them a little more time for some reason, they can. I think
Right.
5's kind of the max, really, if we were going to look at a number. I mean, why would you give them more than 5 if you're not even giving the
No.
PD people 5?
No,
So,
no, I agree.
all right, I'll draft something up for that. That's probably the easier one to go over. That's one. We talked about creating lighting standards, and I had thrown up a chart about that. I know in my prior job, we had a pretty good system to deal with it. Corey indicated that, and when he was at Loveland, they put together a pretty good code for that. So we have a couple examples we can draw upon. Right now, we don't have anything that really substantiates like what we're using to people, so we need to have something in there. So I don't know that anybody would disagree, we need to have something. It's just a matter of like how in-depth do we want to make it. So, I mean, unless somebody's not agreeable with that, we would probably proceed and do some research on that. We might even throw out more than one alternative. I know in the past, what I've done sometimes is I've drafted up like 2 totally different ways, or if it's just like the measurement number,
Right.
and then it's just like what we talked about, you could throw a 1 or a 5 in there, right? And you just replace the number. But in that case, I might come up with like 2 different scenarios. They should both be reasonable,
Right.
and then, everybody kind of picks which one they think is more reasonable. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
we at least need a Band-Aid on our sign code. We have in the zoning resolution a maximum height noted to allow for 30 feet, but basically every area you'd want a sign for the most part is in an overlay.
Right.
And almost all the overlays are capping the signage at like 12 feet and below. So there's this major difference between what's acknowledged in our code as a max versus what's actually being used. I've only seen a 30-foot sign, I think, one time, and it was the Kroger, and that actually was theoretically kind of approved before I got here and started working here. I think they wanted a 100-foot sign originally. I think 30 even is probably more than what they need, but kind of
Yeah, I
crazy.
mean, if we're doing 15 on PD, it sounds like that should be the standard.
Yeah, so we at least need to put that in there. There might be a couple other things in there about signage, like, that are more of a Band-Aid fix. We might want to reevaluate the whole signage code at some point. I don't know that we're quite, in my opinion, the Band-Aids can get put in there first. We have some other things that might need more attention before we totally look at redoing the sign code, because that can be a lot of work.
Is this for freestanding signs? Because I mean, what puzzled me a little bit, the project on Glen Estee Whitneyville, the brewery, and which I think was a great project, but we agreed to the signage up on top of the building, and that's above the height, but yet it's attached to the building. So are we talking freestanding signage?
Yeah.
Signage? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
And I think 12 is probably low. I mean, we've got a lot of signs higher than 12 feet.
A lot of the ones we have higher than 12 feet are probably kind of a pre-existing
Yeah.
condition. And for the most part, I don't think we're seeing anything over 15 that's recent.
Right.
I mean, we have allowed people to reoccupy an existing structure or maybe replace one, but all the newer ones, I think, are pretty much, especially in the overlays, are mostly under 12 feet or under. So I know that the height of the sign is one issue. I've also have in here provisions regarding removal of signs. Billboards and off-premise signs is another item. Right now, you can put an off-premise sign pretty easily, kind of surprisingly easy. I don't know that that's really what we want. And then I put in here some other things that we really don't have language for that I could see, like signs with like obscenities, mural signage, how to treat that kind of thing. I think the biggest ones are more like the sign height and like the off-premise signs. I mean, I think what we would want to do is fix the things that need to be fixed right away,
Right.
and then we might want to look at a more comprehensive approach.
And I don't personally have a problem with increasing the sign height. You said we're at 12 feet now, which that's in the code. We could go higher than that. I don't want to see, like you said, 100 feet, but I think 30 feet's reasonable. I don't, the sign height doesn't bother me specifically. Does it bother anybody else? I mean, a great big giant one, of course, but
Yeah.
30 feet,
Yeah, I
to
mean,
give you kind of
they're-
an idea, is pretty much like the size of a Jungle Jim's got out
Right.
there on the
Yeah.
bigger one. That's
Yeah, I think-
probably close to 30 feet.
I think it has to, it has to be in relation to the size of the development as well, though.
it has to be proportional,
Yeah.
you're right.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we don't want a veterinary office that's in a little space having.
A great
you
big
know,
sign, you're right. I don't know how you work that in. That'd be complicated.
They'd probably have to do something with square footage.
Square footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just talked to someone the other day, like, another thing is our sign code allows for a lot more square footage based on like the amount of frontage you have. So like it might cap somebody at 150 feet, but 150 feet is a lot when you're capped at a 12-foot height.
Right, right.
You start visualizing that, that's a big sign, right? A sheet of plywood's 8x4, 4x8.
Yeah, it's 4 by 8,
So
right?
think of how many sheets of plywood it's gonna look,
Yep.
it's gonna take. That's basically a small billboard,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
But I agree, it makes sense to proceed with modifying the resolutions in order to fix these loopholes or to address inconsistencies first, and then undertake, when you've got time to do it, a comprehensive review of it. So we can sort of tighten it up for right now, knowing we'll go back in and make a comprehensive review. That makes sense. As opposed to just letting it all hang out until there's time to address a comprehensive review.
But unless I missed something, what Rob was talking about was basing the height of the sign on the overall acreage of the square footage or acreage of the development, and then you talked about the 150. Is that the 150 square feet allowed for the sign itself?
Yeah, so right now there's a number in there based on how much, how many linear feet you have of frontage, and then it's capped at 150. So like if you have more than what might equate to 150, you're still capped at 150, but 150 is a lot on
It
some of
is a
these
lot. That's
projects.
a lot for
Absolutely.
It's a
signage.
10 by 15, which you can get a lot up there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And we're not talking interstate signs for the most part,
right.
where they, you're reading them from a far distance. These you're reading from, quarter
From the
mile
street.
and less.
And when they're only 12 feet high,
Right.
it's like a billboard, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's,
The guy that I talked to the other day is over there kind of near Elite Athletics or whatever, and his lot's very small, but he was gonna be allowed up to 150 square feet, and his parking's all in the front, and I'm like, you're gonna have to be careful about where you would put such a sign, even if you tried to, because it's gonna be a obstruction if you're not careful on the old 74 traffic. So, and I think his thing was he wanted to move it back anyways, more to where it might be attached to the building, and I was like, okay, well, that's fine, but, it's even hard to try to locate signage if you're trying to max out on some of these. It just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, well, and the way things are packed in there on Old 74 in that area, it's hard to see anything in there.
Right.
And, yesterday coming back from picking up my grandson, I don't know if he's selling cars, or it's next to the Liberty Liberty Tax Service.
Oh, gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
He had 2 cars parked in the road yesterday.
yeah, I saw that.
And it's like, but I couldn't see, there's so much stuff there, I don't know what he is. I don't know if he's body shop, sales, whatever.
Is that the place that was near the, is it near Holman's?
It's.
No,
it's
we're on Old 74.
on Old
It's
70
by
Closer.
Siler's and,
Yeah, by Siler's, that area.
and that Liberty Tax, it's right there close to my street.
Where the vape
Clermont
shop
Lane
is
comes
and all
into
that stuff.
74. UDF is across
It's
the
on
street.
the north side of the street.
Okay.
On the north side of the street, yeah. Yeah,
I think
think
I
of
know
the
what you're talking
intersection of Genesee, Withensville, and 74. There's a UDF there. We'll continue east a little bit on 74, and it's right on your left.
Yeah, it's not far
There's
off.
the
Okay.
Liberty Tax, there's the Silers, and then they're sandwiched in between.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
They have a couple Dodge Chargers that are just like paint stripped and no engines. They're sitting there waiting for somebody to give them a fortune and for a Dodge Charger frame, 2 identical Dodge Charger frames. There's a bunch of used cars there, like what Mr. Wayne said.
It almost looks
One
like
was
a
in the
junkyard.
street yesterday.
Yeah, and the Statue of Liberty was just sitting on the curb next to it.
Yeah,
So,
sitting there.
Well, Scott's been sick the last couple of days, so if it's been there very long, I'm surprised he's not noticed it.
Yeah,
I know they move it around a lot, because I like cars, so I'm always looking, but yeah, yesterday they were in the street.
yeah, they got too many cars now.
Huh. I'll try to say something to Scott when he's back. He's been sick for a couple of days.
Okay.
Let me make a note of that real quick. 74.
He'll probably know who we're talking about.
He might even be watching, who knows?
Yeah. I guess I
Alright.
have to look for a sign next time, instead of looking at the cars.
Yeah,
The other thing that I really kind of had noted is potentially to add an article regarding landscaping, because we have in our planned development district language in there about how to landscape appropriately in different scenarios. But other than that, we really don't have good language in there about what a buffer yard should involve and entail.
Right.
So it's kind of, again, we're relying on what we've done in other places and saying, well, in general, this is what we're doing in other places, but we're not giving people like hard and fast examples. So like in my last job, we actually redid the landscaping part of the code, and we gave people 2 to 3 different options for each type of buffer yard. So it wasn't just, one way every time. It was like, these are equivalent, or you can propose something that we think is equivalent otherwise, and it was based on the technical review committee, which at the time was a group. It wasn't just one person, and it wouldn't fluctuate a lot, because you would have planning department, engineering, surveyor's office, several people looking at it. At the township level, we don't really have the luxury of doing that unless we kind of create a committee, but we can at least put in a couple options and still give them like a way out.
Sure.
And the other thing we did that I found useful when I started doing research is we put a list of plants that you could not plant near the right-of-way or certain easements like stormwater easements. So for example, anything that was a fruit or nut-bearing tree could not be planted by the road or in a stormwater area because you didn't want it dropping and,
Right.
becoming a problem hitting a car or getting the drains full.
Yep.
You could buy a cultivar that did not bear, so the same type of tree, but not one that would actually
Right.
drop the fruit or nut or whatever. And then also we added, you couldn't put not invasive species in there, and you couldn't put weak wooded things in there. So like a Bradford pear, nope, because they are horrible.
You can't even buy them now.
Yeah, and then like the silver maples, I had 3 at my
Right.
first house, and they just drop all the time. And so what we were doing is
Cottonwood.
looking at a lot of different places, what was in their codes, and I would write down the scientific name, the common name, and then I would write down for people to see in the code the reason why it was in there so that they could understand. And then if they wanted it on their private property, that was fine, as long as it didn't go
Right.
out into the road, or if they want to clean up their own property, that's one thing, but, getting in an easement or a right-of-way is a whole other thing. So that's another thing I think that would be kind of useful to have in our code. And I've done research on that already, so it would just be a matter of like, how much do we want to tinker with our buffer
Right.
yards?
Well, we still, go ahead.
You have a resource from the Parks and Recs Committee. I can't think of his name right now, but he's an arborist.
Yeah, could you give me his name? I actually, now you said, I remember
Yeah,
somebody
I-
told me he was on that group.
Yeah, I'll get it to you.
They have a meeting coming up I was gonna try to make because we're looking at, applying for a grant, and it would involve maybe making an adjustment to the parks plan, and getting some feedback from them. So
We need to keep some flexibility, though. In the past, we've taken the adjacent property owners' desires into consideration. And in the case with Walmart, they really wanted privacy fencing instead of any type of plantings. And so privacy fencing is what.
So
went in.
fencing is something you can add in there, or a wall or berm,
Yeah,
and you can say like, it's a combination of these things, right? And I think the way we had it in there, the way I had it drafted is it would allow for you to reduce the size of the buffer yard potentially by like maybe half or something, depending on how it was done and what type of fence it was. You couldn't use a slatted fence, like chain link with a slat in it. That was not allowed anywhere, especially for buffer yard purposes. So I can draw on that. I think the biggest thing is going to be, I think the unacceptable plant list is probably about the same because it's the same area. Like literally, if you go 30 miles west, like it's the same area, like latitude, right? So your zone is the same for planting pretty much, right? It's not like we're this, north and south, where like it might be warmer by 5 degrees or something in one place than the other. So I can work on that. I think there probably gonna be some differences on the buffer yards. Like the area where I worked previously was more of a more rural area. The lots tended to be bigger. But I think we can sprinkle some of the same stuff in there. That one will take a little longer though, because we might have more to talk about on that.
okay.
And then I gotta figure out where to strategically put it in the code. I may have to talk to Corey about that one. And then what we might do is, eventually, what would be nice is instead of having any reference to it in another area of the code, like the plan development, maybe take that out and just cross-reference that other section. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
that if
right.
it's landscaping, for example, where I used to work, it was always Article, oh no, I've not worked there for a while. It was always Article 22, I think. 23 was site plan, 24 was transportation. I think it was 22. 21 or 22, it was one or the other. And that was the entirety of what it encapsulated was landscaping. So you knew if it was landscaping related, it was in that section of code every time. So I would, instead of having like different sections that refer to like different standards, like it'd be better to have it all in one place.
Right.
Like what we've done with auxiliary structures. We reference out a sub-article for
Yeah,
auxiliary structures.
yep.
Okay.
So that's the way I would like to try to do it.
I think it's a good idea.
And we have more that I could talk about, but I think that's enough for now, unless you guys, if you guys particularly want to talk about anything that's a resolution-related item, it might already be on here, but let me know, and I can consider adding that in here too, and it's just going to be a matter of like what we have time to do.
Well, it wasn't, I guess it was last year, we had a case where on Old 74, a storage facility was
Right.
being proposed, and it was this gravel issue, and we were talking about, the entire surface was gonna have to become impervious surface, and it made sense that, maybe the entrance was paved, but the rest of it could remain impervious or gravel. And we were talking about then that gravel paved requirement in general for all types of applications. Do we just need to make sure that the first 50 feet is paved, and then beyond the 50 feet, it can be optional to have alternative paving instead of something impervious? Is that one still on the list? We
Yeah, it's
talked about?
actually right below the lighting standard note that I have, so I still have it on here, and it's actually one of the only two other ones I didn't talk about that I had starred,
Okay,
so it's on there.
okay.
I don't know, from a staff perspective, like, if the zoning inspector and the administrator have strong feelings about it. My thought is like, especially if you don't have a dust problem, which is part of the issue, and it's not gonna tear up the road, which is generally one of the other major issues, then in some cases it might, and especially if it's not visible, then like, okay, what are we really trying to accomplish here? You know?
Right. Especially if it's 50 feet back, I mean, off the road, if you've got the first 50 feet paved, how does that, how requiring the rest of it to be paved, does that make a difference for somebody's driveway or for a storage facility where, especially on limited lot size, where you've got buildings, covering most of the area? To me, having gravel in there to allow some water drainage just made perfect sense, but yet we couldn't permit that because our code didn't allow it.
Yeah.
I thought that was disappointing.
The only instance where, in our code, it does not require paving is when you have like an industrial use, I think that's 200 feet away from a residential use, if I remember right. But, is that really the only instance that really makes sense? I mean,
No, I think it could be applied more. Like you said, you should probably, a conversation with Scott and Corey and see what their take is on it, but I don't have a problem with saying 50 feet, and then you can have gravel beyond that, or other types, maybe paving stones. I mean, legitimately, you could just put paving stones down and have a paved surface, but.
which we allow for in certain circumstances, as far as like if somebody's putting, like, for example, like a vehicle on their property and it's not in the driveway, sometimes we'll tell them as long as they put a hard surface underneath of it so it won't sink in the yard,
Right.
they've allowed them to do that. So, yeah, that was one of the only other two I had that was
Okay.
starred. I think the other one that I had here was just to take that section on accessory standards and maybe do a small table for it. That's like a quick reference, kind of like what we have in Article 6 for the different zones, because that's kind of a long section, and sometimes when you're looking for a quick answer, you got to go through quite a bit of that section to find what you're looking for. So that was the only other thing, was to maybe, that I had starred on the list. And I've got them color coded too. There's, some that I consider more important based on what the staff talked about or what we've talked about previously, but those are all the ones that I had starred. So, is there anything else that you guys would
I don't
think
have
of
anything
maybe?
else.
Right off the top, no.
I mean, we can do this again, as we get
I think it's a good
done.
idea. I think these kind of meetings are important. We haven't done this, rarely done this, and I think that's a good thing to do.
What does, parking lots, paving? Like Holman's, I thought we had an issue one time with Holman's.
Holman's not, everything in Holman's isn't paved.
Yeah,
No,
a lot of it isn't.
The issue we had with Holman at one point was they went ahead and they gravelled in a section of the lot and moved things onto it before they had permission to.
And that was a problem because it was zone residential, I
Right.
think, and they were going ahead and using it as
And
part
that
of
was-
the
I think
commercial
that was-
operation.
Discovered during COVID,
Yeah.
Yeah,
or thereabouts.
yep. We could see it on the aerial, it's pretty
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
And then they came in and they were asking to get a permit on a stormwater feature, and it was like even more, it's like, well,
Right.
now we definitely have to do something, because now we can tie it to an act that we've looked at the area for them. It's like, now we can't look away and not acknowledge that it's not happened. It was one of the first 6 months I think I was here.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's been a while
Thought
ago.
If they paid
Yeah,
it,
no, so I mean, you can easily get dustless gravel now. I mean, when I do landscaping around my house and I want gravel, I put a barrier down, a good heavy-duty barrier, and then I use that number 57 dustless where it's been washed, and there's no dust. I mean, I don't drive on it or anything, but it's dustless. I mean, you can do
Well,
that with it's more
fresh
expensive.
limestone packs down just like concrete.
Yeah,
Oh,
it does.
Yeah, it's,
Fine stuff
I did
does.
that for my trailer pull-off.
Yeah,
Based it in, I've got like 15-inch base of number 2 and 3.
okay.
And then I've got about 4 inches of the fine, and I just rented a tamper and spent the weekend just running it back
Tampering
and
it down,
forth.
yeah,
And you can't even dig in it, it's so hard.
yeah. No, that's all. I don't have any other resolution issues.
Okay,
I have just a
Yes.
thought. I'm not exactly sure, I should look through the code a little closer, but do we have anything regarding residential ADUs
ADUs, oh, yeah.
for residential use?
So, interesting, someone just talked to me about this the other day, and I have that on my list, and when I brought it up in the past, it has basically been said that the township is not really has not been supportive of passing such a thing.
Passing
Which-
what?
Passing such a code, like to allow for someone to have an accessory dwelling unit, like a second little residence that could be detached or.
Like a mother-in-law's house
Oh.
behind.
Or part of an accessory building, like a detached garage or pole barn or whatever. And it's interesting because like, it's pretty common compared to what it was 10 years ago.
You drive around here, you'll see a few of them.
Yeah, but almost none of them are legal.
No, but
Oh, having a second house on a single lot, on the same lot?
Yeah, it's a living unit. It is not necessarily a house. It's almost like an apartment in most cases.
Yeah, like a loft in a barn.
or detached garage that's got a build-over on it.
Okay.
They could be, a lot of times they call them a mother-in-law suite, but
Yeah,
sometimes
we
they're also
don't
for the
permit
kids.
that?
Not as a separate structure, it has to be attached.
It has to be attached.
Yep. So, I have it on here somewhere.
You can do that with a clothesline.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say.
Well, I was
you
gonna
could
say a
take
covered walkway would,
Well, yeah, that's, yeah, you attach anything to the house, it becomes legal. It's just. So you,
That's what it was. Okay.
I just know that I know Clermont County, they're doing a housing study right now, and one of the things that they're looking at is ADUs as a recommendation.
What is the recommendation?
ADUs as a recommendation to provide more housing
There it
at
is.
different price
Okay.
points.
Yeah, I have it on the first page.
You're calling it ADU?
Yeah, it's accessory
Add-on
dwelling
unit?
unit. Yeah.
Oh, I have not heard that term before. I couldn't figure out what you were saying with ADU. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. I'm approaching hearing aid time, and
I can
I'm
put that one on
trying to
there.
fight that.
I can put that one on there to sound out what's going on. I just know that it's been, like, we had one case go to the Board of Zoning Appeals where somebody basically was trying to do the same thing. It was a little different in that they came in for a permit and then not acknowledged it on the permit that it was for a storage structure. And then what they actually dropped off on the lot was a mobile home or manufactured home or whatever.
right.
And then, so it was misleading, and then the use had nothing to do with storage, it was for a mother-in-law or whatever. So,
Okay.
that, had they went about it from the beginning the correct way, I don't know that it would have went as bad as it did, but, you know, in that case, they dropped it there, and as they were trying to get it skirted or whatever, we got over there and stopped them. And then the zoning inspector had to go up there and stop the electric from being connected or whatever. But in doing the research related to that and then talking about it, it's like I could only find one instance that it was allowed. And then we were talking about this again the other day because someone called about it, and the zoning inspector said he couldn't remember any. And I was like, well, when I researched it, I could find one. in our history. But there was like a peculiar circumstance with it, like maybe it was a living unit at one point and then it wasn't, and then they were asking for it to be again.
Right.
So I was definitely curious about it because it is something that you see. And it's not always for the mother-in-law because sometimes the birds are not leaving the nest longer.
Right.
Especially like, I don't know, the last
Right.
5 or 10 years.
So having a cot set up in my garage, that's okay? You know,
Well-
somewhere that when I
Put
get kicked
mom out in
out.
the
So-
garage.
Yeah, when I get kicked
So in
out.
that scenario, you know, sometimes like it's more of a health issue, right? The unfortunate thing is the health department issues are not always well enforced. And so then it kind of becomes like an issue where zoning has to step in, and it was the same way at my last job. Sometimes we have to be more involved with things that I would consider more of a health issue. Sometimes we have to be more involved in things I would consider to be a building code issue. An example on that in both places is also pools. You know, like we're the ones that deal with the pool enclosure here more so probably than the building department, even though it's in the building code. And I would argue 100 out of 100 times it should be enforced by the building department, not the zoning people, because it's a building code. And it's in their code. It's literally in the books for them, right? The only reason it's in the zoning code here, and the only reason it was in the zoning code at my last job, is because they have no confidence that it's going to be enforced by the building inspectors.
The county.
Yes. And it was the same way at my last job. Now, they'll go after them if they don't get a permit at all, but they don't always get them for like the enclosure.
Right.
So, I mean, it just is what it is, unfortunately. You know, sometimes we end up citing stuff that I think we shouldn't have to, but I can say, having worked with a lot of different types of communities, it's like that everywhere. So, I can ask about it as far as like the ADUs, because I just got a call about it the other day, and I had actually meant to bring it up anyways, just to kind of see if anybody wanted me to bring it up, because I gathered from previous experience talking to people, it was not real popular, and I don't know what all the reasons for that is, but I'll see if I get my head bit off if I bring it up.
I think it's our township is changing. I mean, there's changes going on. We're becoming, we've seen a dramatic increase in businesses, and the businesses affecting housing, and the businesses are affecting the types of housing and what the people want in housing and what they want to be able to do on their property and to make it a lot more efficient. And ADUs, I have very little experience with it, but I can see the feasibility of that. And if there's enough land for it, if there's enough space, and certainly there have to be the right size lot for it, but why would you restrict that? I'm not seeing a viable, or I'm not seeing the rationale behind restricting it. If the lot is of appropriate size, that it could be an auxiliary structure or an ADU. I mean, if we permit an auxiliary structure in that place, why wouldn't we permit an ADU? I don't understand that.
And with ADUs, you still have the primary use, like, which is traditionally like a, single family house, right? The other thing that often would come up other than the ADU is like what you would otherwise consider a tiny home, which is a similar subject, but is totally different, because a tiny home means that's like maybe the only home on that lot, and can be vastly disproportionate on the acreage that it sits on. And so, again, in my last job, the tract sizes were larger in part because it was unincorporated area, so you had septic systems where you had to have at least an acre. If you put a tiny home on an acre, that's a vastly different looking situation, or more, right? And I actually had people tell me that, they wanted to own a tiny home, at least initially, for example, because the young people want to buy the land early, and then as they get older, they can, upgrade it as they want or whatever. Well, you're talking about, it looks kind of odd if somebody would buy 5, 10, 20 acres and then they put a tiny home on it, especially if it's near all these other homes that are bigger, nicer homes. When I left my last job, they were still kind of working out what to do with all that. And here it's like, no, because there's no allowance if it's not meeting the square footage requirement. But ADUs are probably, of the two, I would say the ADUs would potentially be able to gain traction quicker than a tiny home would here. I'm not saying a tiny home is impossible, but I think that you might have to have a tiny home community almost to make it work.
That's possible, but we've got to be open to change, because things are changing, and people have to do more with less money and less funds and less space, and you have to really, you have to be careful of having a bias against allowing something just because that's always been something that we didn't allow, and you have to really take a hard look at it, I think, and say, really, what's my concern here? What's the problem? Am I looking at, is this purely aesthetic? Is there a safety issue? I'm not seeing a safety issue if the house is built to code. Those are the things that we have to take a hard look at, and maybe some people aren't willing to do that, but I'm willing to do that.
If you, for instance, I've got ER, I've got a 2-acre lot, and I put an ADU on it, and fast forward 15 years, well, now we want to sell that ADU off separately. You know, you run into that issue of
Splitting the lot,
splitting the lot, which it's ER, so
you'd have to have a zone change.
right, and, you know, do we want to get into that? You know, that's just one of the potential
I mean, if somebody
issues.
does that, they have to be aware that they may not get the zone change and be able to split it
Right.
all. And that's, it just has to be brought up up front, you know, hey, you can, you know, if that were to become permissible, then that has to be part of the conversation that happens when the zoning permit is being requested, that, you know, that down the road, this can't be split.
Right.
You know, unless you apply for a zone change, and you may or may not get a zone change authorization. So those are the things that have to be discussed, but I'm
I'd rather see
I'm up
us
for
deal
change.
with, instead of people just doing it, I'd rather see them come here because we do allow it in some instances. Otherwise, you end up with the ones that, it's a storage shed, you know,
Yeah.
but there's actually somebody living in it.
Yeah, I know in a couple cases, like, we've had some pretty deplorable conditions reported. And sometimes the police are just as involved as anybody else in that scenario.
Yeah.
So, it's, in a way, it's kind of like, there's some similarities in that, in the situation where some people are biased against rentals. They think all rentals are bad, but not all rentals are bad. I was a renter until I had the means to, you know, buy a house, you know, which I was in my early 20s still when we bought our first house. And, you know, I was a good renter. I mean, I probably made every place I rented just as nice or nicer than the landlord had it. But to me, the renter situation, the renter's not totally at fault because the landlord is like the parent and the renter's like the child. Your child, if you don't enforce things, is going to try to get away with stuff, right? So at some point, the onus really becomes as much or more on the landlord. And I've dealt with a lot of bad landlords in trying to enforce codes in other places. And in some cases, it's the same landlord over and over and over again. And you got a handful of them, right? And they own a surprisingly, in some cases, shocking amount of rentals. And they're just letting them fall apart, not taking care of them, right? I think things can be done to a good standard, and you can also, in this case, if you want to compare it, you can take a perfectly nice-looking house and make it look bad. You know, you got that guy that's in the news on and off for painting his house pink and then, you know, writing people's names on it. And it's not in Union Township, but it's in one of the adjoining
Pierce.
townships. Yeah, and that's a nice-looking house. Why would you do that?
There's some
and
people
you
do
can
some
take-
peculiar things.
And you can take the smaller structure, and it can look really nice for what it is. It
I
just
mean, it's the same
depends.
as our next topic. You can have good multifamily developments, and there are bad multifamily developments. And we've got, like, you look at the top tier echelon, for instance, where it's, you know, it's exceptionally high-end, good multifamily development, then you look at other ones where the police are almost visiting nightly for issues. And that's one of the things I want to talk about. So you can direct a multifamily be developed properly and of a quality and a level that is going to be attractive and beneficial to the community overall. Or you can do a bad multifamily. And that's what we have to be careful of doing. You can do the same thing with, I would say, an ADU. You can make sure it's going to be appropriately built. It's going to be a positive for the community as opposed to a sore thumb sticking out, negative.
Yeah.
And those are things we just have to manage.
Well, we could transition to that, but is there anything before we transition to those things that you guys wanted to cover otherwise? Because I do know that was on your list.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense to at least explore the possibility of doing this. I agree with Mr. Lewis in that a blanket no doesn't make a lot of sense, but if there are procedures whereby we can ensure that it's being done properly and that it's not being a nuisance and it's being done for the right reasons on the right kind of lots, it makes sense. You know, we should be here to, within reason, allow people to do what they want to do with their property. And also, to Mr. Outrich's point, why the county's talking about these kind of things is we are in a housing shortage. Renting is an economic reality for a lot of people. And are we going to be a township that's more inclusive for more people who want to live here, living here? Or are we going to try to box that out? And the position has generally been, we do want people here, and we've approved many different types of construction. To Mr. Lewis's point, echelon, really good, high-value projects that allow a range of living opportunities for people who want to be part of this community.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I
a
think
nice
we want to be a township,
environment.
but we want people to come. We don't want moving them out.
That's happening in a lot of other places. I mean, people right now are being kind of forced to go wherever they can. It's just that the reality of it is there are too many people who want places to live, and a lot of those people unfortunately can't afford to buy property, and they've got to rent. So do you want to have nice rental opportunities or nice opportunities for people to live in or not?
I agree. Well, we can transition then to one of the two topics you
Okay.
wanted to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk, we had discussed multifamily. Now, I printed out the information that Mr. McCormick and his staff, in case you hadn't had a chance to do it. Did anybody see this?
What was the date of
This
that?
is
I've
the email that
seen
went
it,
out,
I've
and it's
not.
got the chart there. I was initially
yeah,
a little
yeah.
surprised at the numbers, but after a lot of thought and examination, I'm not overly concerned about the numbers. Like I said, you look at the amount of percentage that's multifamily, and it's 4% residential multifamily compared to 40% single family, and I don't consider that, with the nature of our township and the changes we're seeing with businesses coming in and growing. This is the kind of, and the kind of developments that, and the kind of environment that these people are looking for to live in, and especially short-term and then possibly long-term. But my concern is more, I think we need to be focused on the high-quality developments. And I know that's something that is always encouraged by the zoning staff when a developer comes in to propose something. And I think that sticking with that requirement for high-quality multifamily is paramount is something we need to really focus on and require. My concern is the expansion of existing multifamily developments, and is it an expansion of a good existing multifamily development or a not so good multifamily development? And so we today get input from the fire department on safety and
Yes.
what all could go wrong and what all needs to be done to make this safe. I think we should, on an existing development, when we're looking at expansion of existing development, I think we should get input from the police department. What has been your experience with this facility? Is this something where you are going to a lot and having a lot of calls? If so, what the nature of the calls? I mean, are they domestic? Are they nuisance? Do they have a homeowners association? I know we send police out to deal with, barking dogs, nuisances. And in a lot of cases, the homeowners association should deal with that. It should have regulations that, people are packed in close together, and they shouldn't be able to have a dog that barks all the time, or in the middle of the night, or constantly during the day. But if they don't have a strong homeowners association that enforces that, then we have to rely on the police to make those calls and do that. So if we have an expansion of an existing development in front of us, I'd like to hear from the police department on what their experience has been with that development. And if it is a worthwhile, if we perceive it to be a worthwhile expansion, then I'd really like to see that the quality requirement is impressed upon the developer or the applicant, and they proceed accordingly with high-quality developments. And I don't, even though these numbers, you look at them initially and they look like they're high, I don't think overall they really are that high, not for how our township is transitioning and the amount of business that we're bringing in, and the new business. Look at what's the logistics company off of 275 that is like expanded for the
TQL?
third time now?
TQL,
Yeah. And that's a huge development. There's more development going on in that park. It's going to be we've got a hospital or a medical facility going in there.
Children's, and
Yes.
then I can
And
see the VA
those
going in.
those people are going to be looking for initially possibly multifamily or single family that's clustered together in tight spaces where there's a lot of shared open space. Those are the kind of things that we need to be more, and we are open to that, but I think we're going to see more of that in the little bit of land we have yet to develop, and we don't have a lot of undeveloped land that isn't already developed. And I don't think that additional multifamily is an issue. It's just the quality of it and taking a hard look at the request to expand an existing one. Does anybody else have feelings on this? Mike?
I have actually, Mark, I don't know if you're able to pull up on the screen. Where I work, we have a housing data dashboard that will be demoed at the zoning thing that we're going to on Friday for everyone to see. But there's some good data in there. I don't know if there's a way to bring that up. I can show you.
I don't have the screen
Okay.
down, but we could look at it here next time. It's on the OKI's website.
Yeah, it's there's a housing model that we did that looks at within Union Township and other jurisdictions as well. Price points, number of bedrooms, and owner and renter preferences.
Is
And we
it in
can,
the app section?
yeah, I could walk over there and show you.
Is it like the fiscal impact model,
Yeah,
basically?
it's maps and apps.
These are
Yeah.
actual numbers of units.
Correct.
This is one of the things that I think a lot of the people that I hear from that are tired of all multifamily, they see these kind of numbers, in five, that would, in this case,
I know it's in here. 'cause
not
I've
10
seen
times,
it, what
8
they do
times.
change.
Right, and that's
Menus.
what the development over at the school.
Right, but
Doesn't
again,
look like that,
a lot of times,
Yeah.
we're far outpacing. If you look at it, it's more than double multifamily in the.
And because I think I saw the same
Yeah,
thing.
maps and apps.
It shocked me
They
when I
changed
saw
the
it until I
website.
realized
there it
that
is.
Maps.
in the
Okay.
past,
Sorry,
we've
George.
been
Yeah, I didn't know they
actually
did
way
that.
behind. You look at the percentage and it's only 4%
Right,
Could just be
of the
browser.
land.
of the land.
Right.
And,
I think
and so,
that's probably what it
and
is.
the
It's
types
probably
of
because of the
businesses
browser.
that are coming in are attracting people that want these types
Should
of
be
units to
regional,
live in. And I think quality developments are
I,
what we
yeah.
have to shoot for.
So, when they talk about like TQL, my niece's husband
And then just keep
works,
going, use the dashboard.
and there's a lot of people that can't afford that high-end stuff.
And,
And consequently, they're living in some of the, so,
yeah,
yeah.
'cause that one's a-
And that's gonna happen, but we can't
Yeah,
encourage
well,
I haven't used this
growth
yet.
in that
Right,
area.
right.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
select
I mean,
jurisdiction
I get
neighborhood
it.
real quick.
There's a need for it, I think there's a need for
top.
more single-family by far,
it's right there.
but
Yep, and then
it's not as
drop-down
profitable.
menu,
That's
type
really
in
what
union.
is driving all this
Or you
right
can
now
scroll
is,
to it.
is profit.
But we're seeing, we're seeing a lot of clustered townhomes, and
Scroll down,
they're
I'm
single
sorry.
family, the R4,
Yeah, the high-density single-family.
high-density single family, and that's
Clermont.
like in an area in between traditional single family and multifamily. You've got,
So
and
then-
that's
And I'm
what
not,
people
yeah,
What tab?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. It's when we go back to building the old,
Okay,
uh,
so I got it up
giant
now.
bricks.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't wanna see
We
the
got
giant
3 and
bricks.
4 story.
Sorry.
We have it up now.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things that we've found with Union Township is So anywhere you see a taller blue bar, that's where that's where there's a need. And
Shoot, sorry.
you're good. And anywhere you see a taller red bar, we have an oversupply. So one of the things that we've noticed is that regionally, we've seen a decrease in average household size and a major increase in a lot of people living by themselves. And so because of that, you see a lot on the 1 and 2 bedroom markers where those blue bars are much taller, particularly at the mid and lower price point. It looks like we have an oversupply of 3 and 4 bedroom midpoint and upper point, 3 bedroom units at the high end and in the middle end. Those 2 red bars in the middle are taller than the blue ones. And then
Are these multifamily or single family?
it's all inclusive.
All inclusive,
Um,
okay.
Yeah, so part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of developers coming in, putting in a lot of more apartment units is they're tapping into that market at the lower end there with the 1 and 2 bedrooms, but they're also building a lot of the high-end ones. But actually, from a cost perspective, you know, there's a much more demand in that middle and lower end price point too, which is
We don't-
always a hard part.
We don't see many of the 4 or more bedroom, especially like the rentals.
Yeah, so this would be, you know, where you have your single-family homes typically, or your 4 bedrooms that they build new, 3 or 4 bedroom ones.
The McMansions.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, according to this, it looks like there's a need for higher end 4 bedroom units,
Yeah.
or more. Because there's a taller bar there.
Yep.
But we have an oversupply in the middle market, which is actually kind of funny when you see that.
So what we're seeing though is, this is just probably driven just based on the economy of,
Yeah,
I want a 1 bedroom apartment that's gonna cost me $1,000 a month.
right,
I can't afford a 2
Right.
bedroom. So the demand is there.
right. And it's just,
I'd like, you know, what
Yeah.
would be neat is to see the historical trending of that.
yeah. And
Yeah,
actually,
and you made a point that you were wanting to maybe have this presented at a meeting like,
yeah,
and the idea a while back was to get maybe a group meeting with the trustees, but that's been kind of hard to do.
yeah,
But I think that would still be a good thing if we could arrange such a thing.
yeah.
Well, even at our next meeting.
Or maybe try to
we could-
tie it into a trustee meeting and invite the zoning commission to be at that meeting. That might be the only way we can really do it if they don't have a working meeting anymore, because I don't know that they're doing working meetings this year. But, I mean, I could see if we could get it done that way.
Yeah, because this is it's a pretty good resource for that. I mean, we even track single-family rental conversions in this. So where you have those real estate
'Cause
companies
I know-
buying up lots of single-family homes and having them as rentals.
Having you do your profile was something that we were interested in. It was just,
No, I get
we
it.
got to follow up on it.
No, it's all good. But I thought this would be useful for this conversation. Because, you know, it's kind of
Oh,
showing.
I agree, I think it's very useful.
Yeah, we'll play around with it the next couple of days, because I've not used it yet. I know some of the apps from OKI pretty well. I was one involved with the fiscal impact model.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever that was first started. I was one of the few that helped start it and stick around for a long time. But I've not used it here yet.
I gotcha.
And we're gonna see a presentation of this on.
Yeah, it'll be, it's the housing one that my colleague Andy Meyer is doing. with
Okay,
this
and you did that one.
Yep. He's the project lead on this. I just provided all the data.
Yeah, he was involved with fiscal impact. He was involved with the fiscal impact model analysis after they got started with it. He wasn't there in the beginning, but then when he started there, he kind of picked up the mantle for that project too.
Gotcha.
So I know him pretty well.
Yeah. But that was one thought I had, and then 2 other thoughts I had in this kind of conversation. One of the things we're kind of noticing, obviously with brick and mortar retail, a lot of those places are, you know, those chains are declaring bankruptcy. And so I know that like the occupancy, at least around the Eastgate area, seems to be pretty reasonably full at the moment.
Other
But
than
Because
the
we've got a
mall.
Joann's closing.
Yeah, we got the Joann's going.
Is ours for sure closing?
Yes.
All the Joann's are closing.
Oh, I
didn't
thought
know
they had
that.
only.
Yeah, they announced
I
them.
thought-
They just
all
announced
of them.
all of them.
Oh. Because it had only been so many hundred before.
Yeah,
Right,
they're
yeah.
closing them all now and selling off all the assets.
But one of the thoughts I had on this was, does that commercial, like, because I know it's a very intensive commercial within the code there. Do we allow multifamily on any of that area? Because I keep noticing that we're building multifamily on green development on the edges. And I'm wondering if it would be reasonable, because the parking's already there, you know.
Are you talking
like-
about like over by where, in an area like commercial, is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
any of the big
Like-
commercial districts.
So,
Joanne's area.
The only
Yeah.
thing we've discussed is in the mall. That was discussed during some of the mall evaluation options. What can we
Yeah.
do with the Eastgate Mall?
Yeah.
And we had that
The
at,
Village.
at the
Which in an-
Village. And
which in an
that's the
ideal-
only time I know that we discussed that.
in an ideal world, that would all be zone PD, but it's not. It's all zone business.
Right.
But it could be changed to PD.
Yeah, but they've got to be involved with it. Someone has to be involved with it, and right now, it's not, that particular site's not gonna happen. For, like, let's say the owner of that plaza that you're talking about, I think that's also zone business, and we would probably tell them if they wanted to, they would have to go to a PD zone to do
Right.
that. So a lot of the property where you're seeing the mix of use is, there's zone PD.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah, I was wondering
Which,
that.
once you get away from the 275
Yeah,
interchange, where the mall is, once you get very far away from that, instead of seeing a lot of red for commercial, you start seeing a lot of green, which is PD.
I see. Yeah,
There's a ton of PD more closer to here in that Glen Estee, Withamsville area,
Yeah.
and Klepper, and over here by Sam's Club and Walmart, like a lot. But then once you start, there's a transition area as you go more west towards that interchange and everything, and then there's a little area south where Ivy Point is, that's all PD.
Yep.
But other than that, around the interchange north is all business, if it's commercial or mixed use.
I see. Well, that's helpful to know that it goes that way, because I'm getting a little nervous with that, all that commercial there in the future market where that's going.
I mean,
It's like-
I think if it's gonna be redeveloped, especially if it's gonna be redeveloped on a bigger scale, we're probably looking at eventually like a PD across the board for all of that area.
I gotcha.
The Kroger, they're out of that.
They're still in their current building, but I've heard that their lawsuit is supposed to be resolved by the end of March, I think.
Okay.
I mean, who knows? I mean, somebody could file and it could take longer, but that's what I've heard.
I gotcha.
I hope so.
And then just the last point I had on this, with multifamily in particular, there's a concept in housing research called filtering. So when you build a new luxury apartment building, the last one that was built that was new starts, they can only raise it so much, they can't compete with the newest and best
Right.
thing. So
Right.
over time, as buildings age and things like that, you kind of see a stepping down in the rents, or kind of based on what's at the asking rent. You can't ask as much as the brand new thing. And so one of the issues that you run into, this is Piccadilly, this is, the View on Royal Oak, all those apartments. Once they reach like 25, 30 years, where you're starting to see major mechanical things that need to be replaced, big components of those projects, if you have an absentee landlord that's not making those regular investments, you often see rapid sales. So they sell to an investor and then to another one and then to another one, and that's always a red flag. In the work and research when it comes to like the concerns about police and all of that, where you start to see that. One potential just thought I had on this is, have we ever had any multifamily projects that have reached that age ever go to condominiums? Like, have they ever been condominiumized? Because I'm looking at a project, it's around the corner from my house, it's the Shaler Glen apartments, and then next to it, they have condos. And those condos, they sell for 100,000, like, today.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a very good,
That's a good price point. for
that's
lot
a
of
great
people.
price point
Yeah.
to start out at. So I'm kind of wondering if we have like, if there ever been any of that where you have those, because we have a lot of 1970s, 1980s apartment complexes around in the township.
Yeah, I can't answer that offhand. I'm sure our administrator will be able to answer that better than I can, because he's been
Yeah, I'm
here much
I'm not
longer.
aware of anything, but that's something I might not be aware of. I mean, that wouldn't have come to us for that, and that's a possibility. That's a great idea.
I know there's two projects I can think of where they have been updating things that are probably around the same time period what you're saying. One, I think, was in a CRA with the county, I think. The other one, I'm not for sure, but one's around Mount Carmel, near the park there, or adjacent to the park there.
Right.
And they were updating that one a year or two ago, and that's how I ended up getting the township almost another acre of ground. They basically donated it for us to pay for a survey. So we're working hard to try to improve the Mount Carmel Park, which nobody knows about because you can't park there. Or you have to do it in the street, basically. And then the other place was, I think it was over by Summerside. But whether or not they've just renovated it and they're renting them out versus condos, I'm not really sure. There's potential for that,
Yeah.
sure.
I was just wondering, because there's a multifamily complex that's on the corner of Clough and Mount Carmel, behind the gas station. I look at the roof on that building, I drive past it regularly, and they've had a tarp on that thing for at least 6
Oh, yeah.
months.
Really.
That building has a history going way back of being like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm taking notes on some of this, and then, of course, we're recording, so I can always go back and
Yeah.
go over some of these, but we'll definitely, when we have the screen up again, we'll look at the housing data dashboard.
Okay.
One of our meetings more.
Yeah.
We'll play around with it, and look at it as a staff. I had heard of it, but I've not been on it yet.
Okay.
And then I'll send you some information so we can get the demographic.
So Andy Meyer
Process
was the
going.
guy you work with?
Yeah, Andy Meyer's the one that
Okay.
is the project lead on that. And I'm actually currently working on a demographics dashboard for the region as well. It's just not ready yet.
How long is that? What's your projection on getting that finished?
I should have that done probably, well, all the data is in there now. It's just, I don't have the technical skills to actually design and build it in Shiny, like to actually build the dashboard. That's in our GIS department right now. But the timeline on that is probably for the summer.
Oh, that's not bad.
It's gonna take a minute, but there's a lot of good data in there for
Dave
that too.
Shuey's still doing all that?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see that.
So for any, either high-density, single-family, or close-density, or the multifamily, can we start requesting the HOA rules and regulations to be submitted?
We can request whatever we want. It'd be better.
Can we require it?
Yeah, I was gonna say, requesting versus requiring is kind of the key. If we want to require it, then it either needs to be in the code, or we need to specify it on the application form, which it's probably better to have it in the code if you really, really want it. But if we put it on the application form and it says so on the application form, a lot of times that's enough to get you what you need. So we could try that approach potentially, which,
That would probably be the simplest one to implement first.
right,
Because I think seeing what the developer is willing to take responsibility for within their development is important to the way we make decisions. And what types of things are they really taking responsibility for what goes on, and to minimize the amount of external intervention that has to occur from the police department involved in whether it's even, no matter what the development is. I think HOAs, if a development's being presented to us and a zone change is being requested, I think it's reasonable to request the HOA to see, well, what are you going to take responsibility for in this development, clustering people together. And I'd like to see that. And then I'd like to also, on any type of expansion of an existing development, get some police input. Is this a place that you visit regularly or not? And if so, what types of situations? And unless any of you would object to that,
No?
that's a request.
More data we have, smarter we can be.
I think so too.
yeah. I mean, like we were saying before the meeting, and just talking about general topics not related to zoning. Sometimes, though, ignorance is bliss, and you can have too much information too sometimes and make it more complicated. But yeah, I think one of the other things that's not code related that I've got on my list is to look at making changes to the application forms, because there's sometimes isn't information that we want on there, and sometimes that's like what we're talking about now, and sometimes it's a field that we might want to track that we haven't been tracking. And sometimes the forms have information that might be information we really don't need, right? So like remove and replace, right? So that's another one of the items I have on my list is for us to work on the application forms. And that, we can tie what we're talking about now maybe in with that.
Because we get input from the fire department. You know, it's health, safety, welfare of the community, and getting input from the police department on what type of situation. Are we getting ready to make a bad situation worse or not? You know, that's the kind of, you know, information that I think we need to have to make good decisions as a zoning commission.
So when we get the fire information, I don't know, and I'll have to ask about this, that they're always, without us asking, gonna give us the information regarding their calls. So it's probably a good conversation for us to talk about with the fire and EMS people as well, because if the police are getting a lot of calls to a place, they may also be getting a lot of fire and EMS runs to the places
Indeed.
as well. And so we may wanna make sure that we're asking for all of that information.
I think that's a good idea, and it could make things more complicated, but I think that's our job. I think our township is getting more complicated and more diverse, and I think these are things we have to take, you know, as we continue developing what there is left to develop, we need to do it right. And I think that's information that I'm willing to go through and read, and after I retire, make sure all of you do it as well. I'm gonna come and watch the meetings and say, did you check this out?
You're gonna come watch the meetings, you just need to come stay here.
So, well, I mean, one other thing I would say about that is, in some of the other communities I've seen in talking about this very thing in the past, I know at least in Indiana, when I worked in Indiana, there were some communities that were trying to, and in some cases they did, pass kind of like a nuisance fee or tax on places where they constantly had to make runs because of nuisances that were being created, where you had like a hotel that was a problem, or, you know, maybe a apartment building that was a problem. They would give you so many calls on a certain time period, and after that it was like, okay, now you're a nuisance. And so it was to try to deter, you know, bad landlording and management of property. You know, you gotta screen your people, you gotta manage your people, otherwise you need to kick them out, right? Because they're just, it's kinda like kids, like if you don't punish them, they're not, and consistently punish them, then like they're not gonna learn, they
That's
can't
right.
do this and get away with it. So, it's about teaching responsibility, holding them accountable. So, I don't know if that's, that particular tact could be ultimately used here. We'd have to see if it's something that Ohio would allow, period, let alone to the township, because sometimes it might be allowed in like you know, like a incorporated area, but not necessarily a township. That would be the other thing. But as we're looking into these things, that's another thing we might want to, that we'll probably, if we're going to spend the time looking into these things, we'll probably check that out too.
Okay.
I know we have had places like a particular hotel, for example, where we were having a lot of runs
Is that right?
to a particular place,
Oh, yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I mean, there were one or two of them they were hitting a lot, same place over and over again. And Township has considered trying to approach that situation in a similar fashion, if not in the same fashion as like a nuisance.
See, my request, the request for police input would apply to cases in the past where we have, you know, approved. What's the track record on this hotel, or similar types of developments, and what can we expect an approved development, you know, what kind of nuisance or issues or resource consumption would these require? Could they potentially require? Well, cool, I think that covers the multifamily, unless anyone else has anything else?
What is exempt? 22% of our property is exempt.
Government,
Okay.
could be state-owned,
Okay.
which can be school property as well.
All right,
Could
Is
be
nature center?
churches.
all right, so it's basically non-tax paying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is the nature center in that figure?
I think so.
Okay.
So like, maybe like a big nonprofit owned area like that.
Okay.
Is that it?
That,
Yeah, I think actually this information would be something that a lot of residents would probably appreciate.
So we are working on, until we do an update of the comprehensive plan, we're also working on a community profile, which we could update again whenever we get, information from OKI, for example. And I had created one at my last job, and I had shown Corey what I had done, because I'd seen another place do it, and they were much bigger, like the size of Clermont County or bigger as a whole. And I was like, we can do better than that, and we're small, and we did.
Right.
And it was a really useful, I don't know, maybe 10-page little book, and you had demographic information, housing information, transportation information, you had community contacts in there. But the nice thing about it was, whether you were a resident or someone who was just doing research on a community, it was very eye-catching in the cover, and then it was very easy to flip through there and see what you wanted to see quickly. And so that's what we've been working on.
Okay.
And we're setting it up to be very similar in terms of the layout. We're just shifting the color scheme to be more like Union Township, and then working on some of the pictures. Because I would take some pictures, and then I had a professional photographer, got permission to use his images, and I just had to put a credit for him.
Yep.
So the only other part we were working on, other than the editing on our end for our stuff, is the pictures. So. And when we get that up, I always do it on the main page as a highlighted item, so you couldn't miss it. And then we would update it every year. Well,
Okey-doke.
to the extent we could. Some numbers were kind of static for a longer period. But if we had a road count or transportation service that we were referencing, and they would update their numbers, we would get that. So.
All right,
Now
last
you have
item.
one more thing that you wanted to go over?
One more thing, and it's just a few minutes, it's the motion formats. It's probably time to take a serious look at changing our motion format or updating our motion format. Our motion format's different than the trustees. Do we need to be more in line with that? And I'm ready to turn, I've been managing these now for a while, and I'd like to turn them back over to you, Mark, and let you decide, and your team decide what should our motion format be? What makes the most sense? Are we doing things in our motions now that is not useful, is not necessary? We reference the 2030 plan, we reference a specific focus area that it's in. Are those useful things for the trustees? And this would be input from the trustees, would require. It's a time to update that. Again, it's been the legacy for 20 years now that we've been using that format, and longer, 25, I guess. So I think turning that over to you and your staff, and then those formats, I think, should be given to, as we get new zoning commission members, that's part of the training that the zoning commission new members should get, is get an update of the formats, an explanation of the rationale behind the format. What it, they should be looking at the 2030 plan, they should read through the 2030 plan, they should read through the zoning resolution, especially sections we deal with, plan development and multifamily, all of it, not necessarily all at once. Don't want to overwhelm a new member and say, you know what, this isn't for me. You've got to attract people in, but I think having being familiar with our growth plan, our zoning resolution, and the formats of what a motion is, and I think that takes some of the mystique or the fear out of making a motion if they have a format to work with. So it's probably it is time to take a hard look at it, and I'm up for any changes you would recommend.
Sure. I know when I first relatively started working here, we went over some of that, and I know that whenever I've gotten a new board member, in this job or my last job, I would try to meet with them, I give them a copy of our code book, our comprehensive plan. Ohio in the last year has updated its very outdated guidebook for planning in Ohio. And so we have that. It's maybe about a year old, and it covers a wide variety of topics, some that this board doesn't deal with because you don't deal with subdivision regulation here. So it's not as relevant as if you were working with the county where you would have to use it. But what we can do is we can scan or whatever snippets of that.
Right.
In Indiana, we had the Indiana Citizen Planner Guide, and it's funny because I was on the board in Indiana, and I was the person that helped update that, and I was essentially like the editor for that, and helped tweak things and worked with each author of each area. And then Ohio updated it because they saw, I guess, in part like we had updated ours, and ours was free. Like, we just put it on the web for everybody. Ohio, you got to pay for the book. It's in a very nice book form. But I would share that, and I would carve out the first most relevant things for a new member to read. There's some other basic references I might give someone, and I would refer to them to the code like, hey, if this is what you're doing, most important to you probably in your job would be articles so and so, and then just see if they have any questions. And then if we have that demographic profile in there, I'd probably throw that in there as well. And I usually just try to, I mean, that's what I did with Michael when he was appointed as an alternate. I also met with all the other people if I could get them to meet with me. And so we do kind of try to do an orientation,
Okay.
especially if they've not been involved in the past. Now, with potentially two of you not being on the zoning commission next year, it's kind of a matter of, one, do the alternates have an interest in being back on the board, and do they have the time? If they're not both able to do it and interested to do it, and the trustees are not both in agreement in both situations, then you have potentially one or two new board members, not just alternates. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out.
And
No
I can
matter
be-
what, we're gonna need two bodies, right? If we
Yeah,
wanna-
I can be an alternate. If it gets to be an issue, I can
That's right.
certainly be an
I'll
alternate.
always be there if you get in a pinch.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Can alternates chair the commission?
No. No, they cannot.
You're just taking a year off.
But, but what I find instructive with the motion template, and I've used it since Mr. Lewis shared it, is I find that in preparing cases, that reviewing the motion template in preparation, you're not prejudging the case before you hear it, but just putting yourself in that mindset and again looking at the Horizon 2030 plan and going like, what do you see in it, and sort of preparing it that way. The current motion template really helps distill kind of thoughts and prepares you for getting into the meeting and hearing it. I like to sit down with it ahead of time as part of my prep and do that.
That's why it's important that it can take you either way, either the direction you need to go, the things you need to consider for approving a request or denying a request.
And to walk through a findings of fact is like, okay, well, if it ends up being like this, what would I think? And that way you're not, when you're in the meeting, if you have something that you want to say and you have a motion that you want to put on the table, you've got an idea about
Yes.
how one does that.
Yes.
Instead of being like, I definitely have an opinion, but I'm not sure how to formally do it. The motion template, in its present form or in an updated form, should that be necessary, is really helpful. Because it will direct you. Obviously, the current form of the reports that we receive, the staff reports, always cite the relevant zoning resolutions. And there's usually some snippet about, obviously, the 2030 plan. But the 2030 plan is so nice in how it's organized and breaks things down that when I've prepped, I've gone to the plan to be like, okay, this is our corridor. This is the aspect of the 2030 plan that I think is most relevant to kind of what we're talking about. As just part of my planning to do it. I think it's something that we should all have and circulate, and it's a good tool for that.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Mr. Lewis sent it out
sent it out to
a
you guys.
few years ago. It's been,
Wow, yeah, it was, I have a hard time remembering yesterday, so.
I definitely sent it to you.
Okay, I'll go.
There's like 5 templates, one if it's text amendments or
Yes.
plan development. There's,
Okay.
there's different things for,
Well, once we get this redone, we'll get them re-signed.
all right,
I'll commit them to memory.
there you go.
And I think I have findings of fact templates also that I sent you guys. I know I did it for the Board of Zoning Appeals. I think I did it for zoning too, but I'll have to double check.
I don't recall getting
You don't
that.
remember getting that? Okay. If I haven't, it's not gonna be hard for me to do because I have the templates I did at my last job, and I also have the ones that I know I did for the BZA. I thought I did them for zoning commission, but now I'm gonna look, because if
Yeah,
you're
I
saying
I
did.
don't recall it, but that also makes sense. BZA, in terms of their findings of fact, have to be much more precise and
Yeah.
are dictated on a case-by-case basis. Ours are generally, but not always, fairly routine.
Well, and then the case of the findings of fact document, there is a more or less a fill-in-the-blank motion for you also. So you might be able to consider like what you've been using and add or meld them together if you
Right.
want.
Yeah, because right now, the current template contains lines for findings of fact, but doesn't specify anything additional other than,
Referencing a
What
specific
corridor,
section of the corridor,
exactly.
focus district area.
correct.
Yeah, it's actually kind of maddening that, so some things in Ohio seem to be much better than what I was dealing with in Indiana, and sometimes it's vice versa. And in Indiana, for example, on rezones, it's in the state code what your 5 major criteria are to consider for a
Oh, that's
rezone.
nice.
And if you were to write it down in Ohio, they would probably be kind of the same criteria, but it's not in the state code that way. And the last one is, it's the first or last one where it's, it's consideration and conformance to the comprehensive plan, right? One of them is responsible development and growth. Some of them are kind of broad and abstract or whatever. But, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out if there was like kind of a uniform criteria on rezones, particularly because you would think that they would have like a standard set. So what I found is that there isn't. There are some cases where you'll see repeating similar text, and I may have to do some homework on it again, because I know around the time that I was talking to you about motions, I was spending some time on that. I may have them done already, and maybe I just didn't send them to you, or I don't know. I'll look it up. It's really nice when it's spelled out at a high level, like in your state code, because then you can say, what are your findings, what we would do on the
Right.
templates is we would actually have the applicants fill them out too, and turn them in at the time of the application, so that when they
Oh.
filled it in,
Right.
you could choose to agree with them or not.
Right.
And if you agreed with their points, then you could say, yeah, I think
Exactly.
you're good here. And if you disagreed, you could deviate at that point.
Well, they kind of do that a little bit now in the application, where they list the reason for their, so, that's in the application, where we see their rationale for.
The reasons, but then they don't go through the same criteria that you would look at,
Oh,
right?
Right.
So if you actually make them answer the very things that you're trying to
Oh, I see.
question, right? And it's the same question every time.
It becomes an easy way
It's
to,
much easier exercise at that point, right? Either you're in agreement or you're somewhat in alignment or you're not.
Okay.
So I'll check, because I know I spent time working on it, and I know I spent time researching the rezones particularly. I'm gonna have to see what happened with that, because if you're saying I didn't send them out, then maybe I didn't finish them. But I know, like,
Yeah, I don't recall
even if
doing that.
if nothing else, I could pull them off the old website from Dearborn when I worked over there, because I know that they're part of the applications now. We added them to the end of the long form. So that's another part of the application process, is I want to have what we call short forms, which is literally just the piece of paper that we're getting now for people that use them regularly, and for people who may only come in and do a permit once or twice their whole life. We would put in a long form which has instructions and a checklist for like your site plan. So literally, it's like you're holding their hand, showing them how to do it, more so than just handing them a form and they don't have any idea to do what it is they're doing. So,
Okay.
and then on the long forms for like public hearings cases, we would throw in the template of the findings of fact, and we would have them answer certain sections, like your 5 findings or whatever. So,
Good deal. I think we covered a lot tonight.
Yeah.
I think it's a good meeting.
yeah. Of course, we can, maybe look at doing this again in March. The day that would have a scheduled meeting, I am gonna be out of town. So if we end up having a meeting in March, we would either I wouldn't be here or we'd have to move it. And we didn't get any applications today. So I guess what I'll do is I'll talk to Corey about, do we want us to draft these things and then, run them through the trustees and have them come back to you guys, which is, I think, the way that they were doing it in the past? Or do we want to start here? Because that's what we did the last time, that we were doing like a big series of things.
Right.
Because I think you can do it either way. It's just if the trustees would prefer to one way or the other, or, Corey has a preference based on something for some reason, I would like to know that. Either
Yeah.
way, that needs to come here. It's just a matter of whether it starts here or not.
Right.
Yeah, I'd talk to Corey. I think his direction on that would be fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue it either way, because at the end of the day, if the trustees have a preference in the very beginning on how to do something, it'd be nice to know that instead of like spin our wheels.
Right. And Corey will know, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I have.
All right, I think, the only other thing would be administrative, and I think this whole meeting has been administrative.
Yep.
All right, so I think we're going to call the meeting. Let's see, it's 8:31, so I'll call for adjournment. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
A second?
Seconded.
All right, we've got a motion for adjournment. Mr. McCormick, please call roll.
Mr. Shannon.
Yeah.
Mr. Wing.
Yes.
Mr. Outrich.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, folks.